Councillors and ladies and gentlemen in the public gallery, before we commence the meeting, I'd just draw your attention to the fire regulations which are on the screen behind me. There are no practices aimed for tonight, so if the bell goes, it is for real. Please leave the chamber by one of three exits. 1, 2, 3. Proceed down the stairs, cross the road, and we meet under the canopy outside Waitrose. Can I ask everyone, please switch mobile phones to silent or to off. Just introduce officers sitting in front of me. Barry Devlin, legal man. Elizabeth Sims, who is the head of planning here at Waverley. Tim Bryson, who's the senior planning officer dealing with this particular item. Members of the public, just like to say that we understand the matter under consideration tonight is emotive. However, please be respectful of those around you in the public gallery and indeed the committee. Refrain from booing, cheering or any other form of disturbance. And I ask that you do not use defamatory, frivolous or offensive remarks. Moving on to the main business. Gary, have we any apologies, please?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. We've received apologies from Councillors Brian Adams, Mike Band and David Else. Councillors Patricia Ellis, Andrew Bolton and Jim Edwards are therefore in attendance as substitutes.
Thank you very much indeed. Declarations of interest. Gary, have we had any before the meeting?
Chairman, we've had none received prior to the meeting.
Continuing then, questions from members of the public. Gary, have there been any?
Did nobody else have any?
No. Okay.
No questions from the public.
Gary just reminded me that I should have asked you if any members present have any declarations of interest that they haven't declared already. Nope, thank you. So we'll move on then. I've used the Chairman's prerogative to table a note from, I think it's the objector to the planning committee. The people were advised last week that they had to put their request in by Friday midday by the committee secretariat. This wasn't done. They rang this morning, and then about 5:30 this afternoon, I think they sent an email. It is on your desk as a table, so that's to read as we go on. Item A4, or item 4 on the agenda, we move to the first planning application, WA 2016-1418, Woodside Park, Cashel Lane, Godalming, GU71LG. Tim, are you starting this one off?
Thank you, Chairman. Members, the site is located on the southeastern side of Catchall Lane in Godalming and comprises a variety of buildings and hard standings associated with the commercial, industrial and community uses on the site. The site has a gradient rising from northwest on the road up to the southeast. The site surroundings comprise large residential dwellings, but there are some commercial buildings opposite the site here. This shows the existing layout again. Members will note the dark and light grey outline on here show the existing buildings on the site and with the existing car parking surrounding the buildings. The green line running through the middle of the site is the boundary of the defined settlement under the local plan 2002. So to the left hand side is within the settlement and to the right is within the open green belt. The open area to the east comprises tree cover and open pond, which is subject to a separate change of use application to be heard this evening. On the left are 3 arrows that shows the existing vehicular accesses into the site from 3 points. The proposal itself is for the erection of up to 100 dwellings, including 25 to be for affordable housing, together with open space, play areas, new building to comprise use class D1 nursery and use class B1 office space, and retention of existing ambulance building following demolition of buildings on the site. This is an illustrative layout of how the site could be developed. The proposed mix of residential accommodation is proposed as 30 one-bed flats, 32 two-bed flats, 4 three-bed flats, 21 three-bed houses, and 13 four-bed houses. So I'll just talk you through the indicative plan as shown. You'll note here the green buildings here would be some of the flatted development proposed, along with the yellow here. The remainder here, the sort of red, purple and orange, would be in the form of houses. This is the existing ambulance station to be retained on site, and over here is the proposed nursery at ground floor level and office space above. You'll note again on this plan shows that defined settlement boundary line here, so that the green belt is on this side and developed area here. In terms of car parking, the original proposal included provision of 189 spaces for residential, 6 for the proposed office and 8 for the proposed D1 nursery, and retention of 3 for the existing ambulance station, making a total of 206 spaces on site. Following on from the committee site visit and resulting from discussions with officers and local ward councillors, the applicant has proposed an additional 10 spaces for the residential accommodation on site to provide in excess of the council's parking guidelines, totalling 216 spaces on site. The application outlines that the majority of vehicle parking would be at surface level, with remainder undercroft parking under some of the flatted development. So this slide shows the indicative street scene compared to the existing. So existing on site, the actual buildings on site is here, and the proposed street scene below. You'll note here the existing residential properties to the west of the site, which front the road here. This just helps give you an idea of the indicated building heights they would seek on any reserved matters application forthcoming. But that's just to give you an idea of the street scene here. This is a section drawing just really through the site, giving an indication of the levels, difference between the road level and further up into the site. It is a fairly steep rising gradient, but that just shows how dwellings would be stepped up, trying to follow the natural gradient line. The application has been accompanied with a transport statement and swept path analysis, which demonstrates that a refuse vehicle can enter and leave the site in the proposed 2 access points, but outline that the proposal includes the reuse of 2 of the access points, and the one furthest west would be closed. Members will note that the County Highway Authority have recommended a number of conditions and informatives on the application, as well as seeking off-site highway works and monies contributions towards various transport improvements in the local area. Members will note within the agenda that the proposal is a revision of a previous application which came before the Joint Planning Committee in June this year. Members resolved to refuse permission for 5 reasons, which are summarised as follows. Reason 1 was the proposal has failed to demonstrate that the number of dwellings and employment floor space could be adequately accommodated on site without causing harm to the visual and residential amenities of future residents, and they would form a cramped layout, loss of trees and insufficient car parking. Reason 2 was harm to the green belt from the change of use of land in the southeast corner of the residential development, which was precisely here. And reasons 3, 4 and 5 related to the absence of a signed Section 106 agreement. Therefore, the applicant has sought to specifically address the reasons for refusal, and I can summarise some of the following changes that have been made in comparison to the previous scheme. A reduction of the apartment blocks at the front of the site from 4-storey to 3-storey. So before, on this plan, these were all to be 4-storey in height. Dividing the buildings at the front of the site to provide smaller blocks separated by gaps to provide views through the site. Again, that's over here. The number of dwellings have been reduced to 100 from 107. Amendments to the layout to provide an increasing parking provision on the site. The retention of the ambulance station, following concerns raised by local residents and councillors to the loss of this community service. The proposal to infill Greenbelt at the southeastern corner of the site removed. Some of the units adjacent to the southern part of the site have been further moved away, to help maintain that separation distance to boundary vegetation here. The mix of dwellings has also been changed, including increased provision of one-bedroom dwellings and a reduction in 2- and 3-bedroom dwellings, and a reduction in office floor space provision. With those proposed changes in mind, the applicant has come forward with an indicative street scene drawing compared to the previous refused scheme. You'll see here, this is the previous refused scheme here, with the flats that fronted the road, and really just showing a comparison, although indicative, a comparison of the heights, building heights here. So members, I know we had the site visit last week, but here's just a few photographs from site and off-site. Here's some existing residential which is opposite the site. This is an residential building just to the east of the site. This is the first site entrance here, coming west from Catchall Lane. This is the ambulance building to be retained. These buildings here would be removed. That's just looking east along Catchall Lane. This is some of the existing flatted development to the east. You can see, and just in the street scene drawing, you can comparison of heights between the proposed and this. You'll note this one rises again following the gradient of the site. Part of the site frontage, so as you can see at the front, lots of hard standing, car parking, the buildings of varying design and form. And these are some of the buildings within the site itself. As you can see, much of a variety of render and warehousey type buildings. So members, in terms of determining issues with this application, I'd like to firstly draw out some of the matters of principal and technical opinion on the left-hand side. In terms of the loss of the employment use of the site, the Council did not refuse permission under the previous application for the loss of the employment use of the site. Although the current proposal provides less new office space, the applicant has sought to address the previous concerns with a reduction in the amount of built form proposed. The affordable housing remains at 25%, which is compliant with the current adopted local plan policy for a scheme with this current density. In terms of highway considerations, the County Highway Authority has not raised objections subject to appropriate conditions, Section 278 works and contributions towards various projects under Section 106 agreement. The site's within flood zone 1 and currently drained via uncontrolled surface water runoff following gravity down towards the road. The proposal includes sustainable urban drainage system to control surface water runoff at a controlled rate. In terms of the matters of judgment on the right-hand side, part of the site lies within the green belt outside the settlement, and therefore the impact on the green belt remains a matter of judgment. The proposal would not, however, encroach onto undeveloped land. The visual impact on the AGLV and Godalming hillsides remains a matter of judgment. Officers are satisfied that the amendments to the current scheme in comparison to the previous refused scheme have overcome reasons for refusal number 1. The impact on residential amenity to both existing neighbouring occupiers and future residents is a matter of judgment. The level of parking provision has been increased in comparison to the previous scheme, and this, in combination with the reduction in dwellings and office space on site, results in a proposal that's compliant with the Council's guidelines, and this does, however, remain a judgment for members this evening. So if I can just talk members through the update sheet now. You know, there's been a few amendments in the report. The number of letters of objection is 11 and not 9. A number of other additions there to insert within the report. 1 per 100 square metre after the 1 per 30 square metre part of that sentence in paragraph 10. 643 square metres and 7 spaces is incorrect in that sentence in paragraph 11 and should be replaced with 287 square metres and 3 spaces. Additional sentence to be added at the end of paragraph 11 is as follows. The proposal will provide 6 designated car parking spaces for the office based on approximately 1 space for 50 square metres and include 3 for the ambulance station, which is as existing. Chairman, I do have some verbal updates as well just to go through. As outlined earlier, the applicant has increased the provision of parking on site by 10. This was done by email to officers today, and therefore, after the description of development, it should say, as amended by email received 19th of the 12th, 2016. There's an incorrect reference number at the bottom of page 44, which should be WA/2016/1419. Additional condition is proposed to be added as well, which could be condition 22, which is to reflect the requirements from Thames Water, and that should read as: prior to commencement of development, water supply impact studies shall be carried out and results submitted to and approved in writing by the local planning authority in consultation with Thames Water. The development shall be carried out in strict accordance with the agreed details. The reason is in the interest of ensuring the water supply infrastructure capacity can accommodate development in accordance with policy D1 of the Waverley Borough Local Plan 2002 and the MPPF. We also have an additional condition 23, which is relevant to the nursery part of the scheme. The building for Class D1, non-residential institution, hereby permitted should not be used other than for purposes of the Rocking House Nursery School or another alternative educational use, unless otherwise first agreed in writing by the local planning authority. And the reason is in order to secure the educational use of this building on site in accordance with policy D1 and D14 of the Waverley Borough Local Plan 2002. And in respect of existing conditions 6 and 18, these are pre-commencement conditions linked to construction, and 10, 12, 13, 19 and 20 are pre-commencement because they go to the heart of the permission. Chairman, with your agreement, we have standard wording for that, which could be added should permission be granted tonight to those conditions. So in conclusion, Chairman, and subject to the changes on the update sheet and verbal changes and additional conditions 22 and 23, officers recommend permission be granted. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim. And now we turn to the public speaking. We haven't received any registrations to speak from objectors or the Town Council by the deadline, which was Friday lunchtime. So I'd invite the speaker, the supporter, Mr. Robert Trendle, to speak. You have 4 minutes, sir. The big one, the big black one. That's the one.
Good evening. I'm sure you remember this site from a committee meeting in June, but for those who weren't present, my name is Robert Trendle and I'm the owner of Woodside Park, which I acquired in 2006. I've lived in the area for 30 years and have had various businesses in Godalming throughout that time, and still have. Woodside Park was built as a laundry in 1850 and remained as such until 1984. It was never built to be a commercial park and has developed in an unplanned manner as various owners have attempted to make it a viable enterprise. Despite considerable attempts to attract new tenants, the occupancy is low and the buildings are outdating and nearing the end of their lives. Your own estate officer has stated that the vast majority of the site has no viable future for commercial use. We have been working with the planning officers, residents and councillors for 2 years to create a scheme that is right for this site, having first met with you at a councillors' forum in January 2015. I believe it is fair to say that during the recent application meeting in June, it was generally accepted by the committee that the site needed redevelopment for mixed use. However, that application failed because of a small number of specific reasons. We listened to your comments at that meeting and the reasons you gave for its refusal. We have subsequently held meetings with local residents, your planning officers and councillors to remedy the problems identified. This proposal is for outline permission only, and all details, including the exact number of dwellings, site layout, appearance and amount of parking, will not be agreed tonight, but will need to be approved by you when we submit our detailed application. The number of proposed dwellings has been reduced to up to 100. The outline proposals comprise a set of indicative drawings to show that this number could fit on the site, with associated parking and amenity space. The buildings fronting Catchall Lane have also been reduced from 4 to 2.5 stories and broken up into smaller blocks to be more in keeping and to provide views through the site and to the woodland beyond. The previous application did not meet Waverley parking standards. The amount of parking has therefore been increased to ensure this is now met. Our meetings with councillors and local residents have highlighted the importance of providing sufficient parking. We are committed to not only meeting but exceeding the Waverley requirements. The site layout has been refined to address other issues. These proposals reduce the footprint of buildings on the site by 25%, and if you include the hard standing, by 50%. This will create a much more open, green and less dense site. The loss of the ambulance station is also highlighted as a big concern, and this has been retained in the current scheme, together with new modern commercial space, including a purpose-built children's nursery. A further concern raised by the residents is the lack of parking restrictions along Catchall Lane. The Highways Authority has indicated that restrictions will be installed adjacent to the site, and we will ensure that this happens. The meetings we have held with local residents have been very positive, and we shall continue to work with them. We are also committed to helping our existing tenants to find alternative premises and are exploring various options in and around Catchall Lane to ensure a smooth transition. Finally, I just want to finish by saying that this is a sustainable development and has been identified in the new local plan as a strategic site and allocated for around 100 homes, including 25 much needed affordable. We therefore ask you to support this application.
Thank you, Mr. Trendle. Members, I open the debate up to you. Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm the local councillor for Central Godalming, and this includes Woodside Park. The application for up to 100 new houses is a revision of a previous application and I believe is an improvement. In brief, it has fewer houses, more parking, and the buildings look less forbidding. Officers have drawn our attention to the buildings, for example, on page 10 of the agenda. In addition, a significant amount of money will be contributed to Surrey and Waverley. It is disappointing that we lose a significant amount of commercial and office space, although I note that a small amount will be retained in the proposed new scheme. There is an impact on the green belt, but I accept officers' reasoning on page 30 that the development is not inappropriate. There is a good mix of small and larger dwellings, and the proposed affordable houses meet our local plan requirements. I would like to turn to parking. Officers have presented the parking numbers. There will always be pressure on parking. There are allocated spaces, but residents may park on the internal roads and may park on the external roads as well, adding to the pressure in Catchall Lane. Some of the parking in Woodside, in the indicative plan, is separate from the majority of the buildings, and I note there may be no direct access between some parking places and some dwellings. However, the applicant has proposed a significant amount of parking underneath some of the blocks. We now understand that an extra 10 spaces will be added underneath one of the other blocks. The extra spaces would relieve pressure and add to the goodwill of residents. I do have one extra request, and that's for electric charging We have set a precedent in the smaller development opposite. We have added a condition that electric charging points be added to the development. And those members who were here last week will remember that Dunsfold will also have electric charging points. I would like to propose that we have an extra condition to provide electric charging to this application. On balance, I believe the proposal meets our tests and the changes are good enough. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Well, let me say I was at the Development Control Forum just over 2 years ago, and I remember the applicant making similar points to those that are in his submission here. I do have some concerns in the fact that they made the point that it's no longer possible for the applicant to maintain these old, unsuitable buildings with low rents, and the applicants are committed to using resources, seek out alternative ways to accommodate the various people who work on the site. The economic role is vital, I think, in this neck of the woods, and to remove so much of it, I think, is unfortunate and not something I can really go along with personally. I find that the development with up to 100 homes on the indicative layout to be cramped, really cramped. I think there are ways of using the site rather more efficiently, and in fact on the item that was tabled earlier on, the local residents talk about the way Linden Homes listened to them and changed the site layout, and I think this is a way forward for this particular site. Certainly 100 is just too cramped. It looks like a disorganised car park to me on looking at the indicative layout. I don't think it's at all attractive. The flats, I mean, the office space could be accommodated on the ground floor of the flats, blocks of flats with the flats above. Offices below, they're used during the daytime. The car parks would be available because people would have gone to work. Seems to me a win-win situation there. I noticed the officers have made the point of the reason for failure, and employment floor space again was something we mentioned last time at the last committee meeting. Also noticed that the tree officer has made some comments there, and I'd like to see that as a condition. Page 33 is in fact the particular relevant information. And the informative 16 on page 68, I find must be conditioned. I think the officers have captured that, but the idea of only 1 bar of water pressure is really just too low. I know I suffer from that at the top of the hill in Hindhead. So my thoughts are this is an overdevelopment without the necessary office space. It's not the way forward, I think, for some of the people who are already on site there. That's the indication we've had today. So my case rests there. Councillor Frost.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. Well, I don't disagree with some of your comments, actually. First, excuse me, I've got a bit of a cold. Firstly, I do believe we can put housing on this site. Now, I know all we're looking at today is an outline, permission and access. We are not looking at details. But as the developers presumably are here tonight, looking at the illustrative layout that we have in front of us, it is dull, boring, box-like, and I'm sure we could do better, and I'm sure they could do better. Putting the office space on the top level, DDA compliant? or don't they have anybody that's disabled in the office space? So we've got those sorts of things that need to be looked at. They say there are 10 car parking spaces for the offices, including 3 for ambulance. I don't think that's enough. Because if you've got office workers, Cattershall Lane, I don't recall being very well served by local transport, and therefore people will be using cars. So I think one could do a lot better, and I do appreciate and I'm grateful that the developers are talking with councillors and they are also talking with the residents. But you have got some still quite big blocks of building there. And for me, 60 to the hectare is just impossible. You will not get 100 homes on this site without it being very cramped, very crushed. And I know we need houses, and I know we need affordable houses, but we ought to be able to do better with this site than that. I'm not too keen on going into the green belt, but sometimes we have to do that, and therefore I'm not overly worried about it. If we go down to, and we look at the monies that we are going to receive, we're not going to receive some of these monies until 40 of the dwellings are occupied. Now, I have a thing about this, and that is that we do need these things done for pedestrian safety, etc., before 40 are occupied. So I think we should re-look at that. I think it's down here. I'm trying to find it. I've got a new system. I'm trying to come up to date, but I've got to find the page. So I do have my concerns. As far as I'm concerned, the main thing here is 100 homes. I know they say up to, but we have got to agree the number. And 100 homes is far too many on this site. And I'm just wondering, there's huge swathes of parking areas. And I thought we were going away from that. We were trying to make our estates look pretty. And so people want to live there. And you know, you can charge extra if people want to live there. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Cope. Munner, sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. You said a lot of what I was going to say. I feel that this has been moving towards becoming an acceptable scheme, and it's clear the residents whose paper was well worth reading feel that too. But I think there's one more stage to go through, and I'd be grateful for advice from the officers whether or not we could approve this in outline and get the changes in detailed, because I think the balance between commercial space and housing has to change. The density of housing would come down a bit, and maybe 80 is the right sort of level, or somewhere near there. And there would be more accommodation for the existing tenants, or some of them. So really, I'm just asking for advice from the officers. I mean, is it sensible to seek that scale of change at reserved matters, or would we be better off, obviously, giving the developer encouragement that he can come back again with a better proposal if we say no tonight?
Elizabeth?
Thank you, Chairman. I think the answer to your question, Councillor Muller, that if members are looking for a change to the mix of uses on the site, that, in my view, goes to the heart of the outline principle, because whilst it is a mix of uses, I think that if you were to approve it with this proposed mix as stated in the description, but in fact, in terms of the layout, you were aspiring to something with a different combination of uses, it would probably be difficult to argue at reserved matters stage that we would be looking for that different combination of uses. So whilst normally I'm saying to you, this can be dealt with at reserved matters, in relation to your particular point, I think if you're looking for a greater proportion of commercial use to be retained, then that is a matter for you to form a judgment on at this stage. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Coburn.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I think I'm in the disappointed category as well. Apart from the fact that the site visit was a darn sight drier than the first one. You know, having walked round the site again, it is very, very constrained by all sorts of topographical features, I suppose, and just the sheer space. And I just feel almost it's back to front. I mean, I can understand why you would want to put some nice houses near that nice lake, pond, and the green space. But on the other hand, I don't like the indicative flats along the front. I've parked on the road both site visits now, and opposite where I park were low cottages, modern but low, and on the side of the road that I was actually parked on, again, we were talking low-level development. Now, I appreciate it's mixed because just further down there's another business area which I turned. But I just feel that this is, again, it's the frontage of this, I just feel, is too oppressive for the surrounding properties. If you look at the little office one to the left, I can't think whether I'm north, south, west at this point, that one, I mean, apart from the fact I don't like it, but that's my personal view, you know, it is low level, you know, it's that's what it is, and the houses to its left, as we look at it, are quite low level. So I appreciate we've got to get a balance here, because we have residential and we have commercial, and it is good to see a mix, and obviously on this site this is what we all want. But I think I was expecting a bit more. I was expecting a bit more than the flats just coming down a little bit in height and being broken up. It certainly is an improvement on what was there before, that sort of big wall of development. But I just feel we're still tinkering to do the impossible, rather than reviewing the site, having a look at the features on the site, and being a bit more imaginative, as one or two other people have been saying, about what we can use the buildings for. And I don't like to get hooked on heights or sort of floors and stories with buildings, but when you've got a site like this, which has this sort of quite steep gradient, you have to be imaginative with what you're actually putting where. And I just feel, as people have said, a lot of hard standing, just a lack of imagination, really, just desperately trying to get those 100 in. And I was doubtful last time whether 100 homes really is possible on this site. 100 homes that people would really want to live in on this site. Certainly some homes, I'd live there myself. You know, it's not that the site itself is unattractive, it's not. But I just think we've got to do the best on this site. And I think myself, it's almost back to front. I would certainly like to see a much softer frontage when it comes in at outline. I certainly want a development on here, and please, I want commercial use on here, I want housing, and I'm delighted the ambulance building is going to stay. But I just think this is still not, it hasn't changed enough for me to say that it's overcome the previous reasons why I personally didn't like it last time. So I'm sorry about that, but I am very disappointed.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Forrest.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I too was a little bit disappointed, because I did as well expect more, but the point that I really wanted to make was already raised by Councillor Mulliner. There's lots of examples of outlined applications when they've come back under reserved matters where members have not accepted what's before us, because we do have the authority as a council to actually go back and say we don't like this and make them rethink a scheme. But I understand here we're curtailed here by the reserved matters because of the mixed use that we decide on now. So I'd be interested to hear what the rest of my colleagues say, but I am disappointed, because I think the spirit is in the letter of the what was sent to us as committee members, that they do want to see, they're not in principle against development on this site. I just think we've missed the opportunity to not make the most of it. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Chairman. I have got a couple of concerns. The first notes that the ward member, Councillor Bolton, referred to electric charging on page 60 in condition 8.3. It does say electric vehicle charging points in accordance with Surrey's car parking guidance. Does the guidance require charging points? I assume from that it does, and that it's covered there. My main concern with this development, I think, really is the loss of employment use. And I thought when at the beginning of the meeting, that we were effectively being told that because it wasn't refused on that in the summer, that we're restricted somewhat. I'm perhaps most concerned. I think it's not too difficult to relocate offices, but there are a number of motor trade uses on those sites, on that site, and I know it's very difficult to relocate that sort of business, light industrial, potentially noisy, though businesses, and would like officers, if they could please, to tell us whereabouts in the area that sort of business might be located to. I know the officer report, and when we raised this at the site visit, we were told, well, that, you know, they can be relocated, but I think I'd like a little bit more detail in how realistic it is to say, in that respect, and what sort of provision there is in Godalming at the moment for that sort of business. I was also looking at, following up on what Councillor Mulliner and Councillor Foraszewski said, I'd like you, if possible, to clarify the need for one-bed flats, because I know that, you know, it's often said people don't want single-bedroom flats. There's 30, I understand, in this, if I remember correctly. And I wondered whether if that were to be reduced, to be re-provided to some extent with two-bed flats instead, but reduce the overall numbers to 80 to 90 units possibly, which might satisfy the Catchall Lane Residents Association, the point that they've made. If it's profitable, obviously, but is it possible for us to pursue that sort of thing at the reserved matter stage, or do we have to make that decision tonight and live with whatever comes forward? Thank you.
Councillor Holder first, and then I'll ask the officers to come back.
Thank you, Chairman. My main concern, like a few other councillors, is the loss of commercial space in his application. I noticed that the applicant has offered to provide alternative accommodation elsewhere for the current tenants, the second bullet point on page 25. I'm just wondering, A, whether that accommodation has been actually acquired, and whether any of the tenants are willing to move. I rather agree with previous speakers that I'd like to see some of the commercial space kept on site and the amount of homes reduced to around 80, so we have a much better mixed development. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you. Councillor Hunter?
I too share the concern about loss of commercial space. The commercial space in Godalming has been eroded rapidly, and we are desperately going to be short of commercial and office space. We're going to become a commuter town, and people are going to commute to London, spend their money in London, and I would like them to spend their money in Godalming. We've got a beautiful high street, and if they're not going to utilize it, that's going to go derelict as well. And we've got to reserve commercial space, employment opportunities in the town, because we will not be able to sustain the town if we do not do this. It'll be too late, and we're going to lose everything. Thank you.
Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chairman. May I first of all thank the residents for sending in their well thought through comments. I'd also like to thank Mr. Trendle for the meetings we've had. I think we're probably all agreed that this scheme is better than the previous scheme, but we haven't quite got to where we should do. And certainly I think we should look very carefully at the mix of the housing. And I'd like to highlight the general problems of traffic in Catchall. I'm sure many of us who go down there know it, but I think we must bear that in mind the whole time. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Tim or Elizabeth, can you? Oh.
Chairman, if I could pick up a couple of those points. Firstly, in relation to the loss of employment, you'll be familiar with the discussions that we've had on this site already, and the report, I think, does set out clearly the planning issues in relation to the loss of employment. There's one particular point, I think, to re-emphasise. The planning system doesn't in itself seek to retain the interests of individual businesses. It's a land use based discipline in that you're looking at whether or not the land use for employment purposes is still required to be protected. Now, it may be the consequence of changes of use are that some businesses need to relocate, and that's clearly a concern for you in the sense that they are local businesses that you would not wish to see completely out of premises. But first and foremost, the challenge for the planning system is to ask the question whether the land is still required for employment purposes. And through the report's consideration, the conclusion, as was reached in relation to the previous application, is in its entirety, the site could be released partly for residential, although there is an indication through the assessment that we've carried out that part of the site should be retained for employment purposes. And that's the position we've moved on from the previous decision. So taking this forward to this current application, as we've already discussed in relation to the question from Councillor Mulliner, I think what's coming out from your discussion is that you possibly would like to see more of the site in terms of a mixed-use scheme retained for employment purposes, and that would be consistent with your previous decision. You were looking for a mixed-use scheme, and that's consistent with the allocation in the emerging plan. But I think it wouldn't be appropriate in planning terms, nor in terms of the decision you've already made to restrict its entirety for housing purposes in the interest of retaining it for employment. So that I hope has covered off the employment point. In relation to the mix of units, that clearly is before your outline stage, and the report does indicate that in fact there is a slight over-provision of one-bedroom units in relation to what the SHMA indicates is appropriate in terms of mix. I think the question was asked, is this something that could be resolved at reserved matters? Well, certainly if a scheme came forward at reserved matters which showed fewer one-bedroom units and more two-bedroom units, it could be equally acceptable in that it would still comply with the SHMA. So I think it's of less concern to you at this stage in terms of mix, because mix can be resolved at reserved matters. But if, however, you feel that the provision of as many smaller units as being provided is in itself contributing to the overdevelopment of the site, then that would be part of your concern, that there's too many small units, too many units overall. And the final point I was going to mention is relation to traffic. And I think we do recognise that that has been raised as a concern by residents and is a concern locally in Godalming. However, we would take you to the advice of the County Highway Authority that have looked at the transport impact. And as Tim has explained, they're not raising objection in principle, but they are requiring all the improvements and mitigation as set out in the report to be delivered in order to mitigate that successfully. So I hope that's covered off those points. I'm happy to take any further questions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. And Councillor Barham.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I agree with much has been said with regard to commercial land. We all know that commercial land is eroding throughout the whole of the borough and elsewhere. One of the reasons, of course, is that the land values are so much greater for residential development than they are for commercial development. That goes for hotels and pubs, etc. We lose all of these things, or tend to lose them. And in this case, we're losing potentially quite a substantial amount of commercial use, which has grown in a rather strange way over many, many years, and of course is not attractive, and as the applicant said, is not in many ways fit for purpose. But that doesn't mean the land ought to be lost. It ought to be redeveloped perhaps for commercial land. Now I recognise that's not what's in front of us, but I think a greater mix of commercial use to me is much more attractive, so that we do maintain that. We've talked about the letter from the residents. I think most of us will have read the email that we got from earlier, I think yesterday or today, with regard to businesses not being able to find suitable accommodation elsewhere. we don't know very much about that particular business, and therefore we don't know what their problems are and what their aspirations are. But it does highlight the fact that we do need to maintain commercial space, and so much has been lost in Cattershall Lane. I don't know what the percentage numbers are, but it seems to be quite substantial, with Wildlife Fund, of course, with a very large area going, the one that we considered at the central meeting last week, which is immediately opposite this site, and a number of others. So I think it's we're going to end up with nothing and just a dormitory town, as people have said. So I support the view that we ought to have a better mix of commercial use.
Councillor Forresky.
Thank you, Chairman. In the spirit of Christmas and goodwill, I'd like to make a suggestion. It's clear that members, officers and CARA all want to see something done with this site and it improved, and it would seem that there's a great opportunity, as the developer is present, to listen to many of the things that have been said here this evening, and to perhaps, is it applicable, able to defer rather than adjourn or come back with another application. And that's not to say I know how this committee is going to vote, but the flavour of it would seem that there is an imbalance and an opportunity once again has been missed. But I think we can create an opportunity again here tonight to have, as I say, the developers here, that they're listening to what members have got to say, and perhaps with the ward members and the officers can go back and then come back with something on a deferral basis rather than go through this whole sorry process again, because I think we're all in agreement something needs to be done and the principle of development is in favour. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm sorry to come back, but I mentioned when I was speaking earlier about some section 106.278 monies, and I have found it. It's on page 15, and it came to mind when the officer was just speaking, when she was saying that the County Highway Authority has no problem provided certain things are done. But if you look halfway down the page of page 15, it says prior to the first occupation of the 40th residential dwelling to pay the county council the sum of £100,000. That is fine, but you know, it's an awful long way down the line to have the 40th house occupied before we get the money for pedestrian safety and capacity improvement scheme of the Cattershall Road Priority Junction with Mead Row, and so it goes on. It tells you the schemes that this money is meant to help. Now, if we're talking about pedestrian safety, then we do need this money earlier. It's time we started to ask for infrastructure improvements at the start and not halfway through. I'm sorry, but I do feel quite strongly about this. If we have already negotiated this, it would be, I would welcome the fact that the officers would go back and say, hang on, we need to actually do some of these things earlier. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chairman. I didn't see this application on the, when it came before the committee last time. However, the car parking provision is unacceptable. Okay, it's unimaginative, and I don't agree with it. Now, I agree with housing on the side. Got no problem with that. But there's no artistic input, there's no design features. It's like a jigsaw where you put pieces together and try to fit them in the space. I think we really need to go back to the drawing board and try to come up with something better. I'm not particularly against the flats along the front, because I know my colleagues have said that it's obtrusive and dominating, etc. But it is lower than the current street scene. But we really do need to do something to make it more acceptable to everybody concerned. It is in the local plan, and I agree with my colleagues that we should put it back and ask them to come back with a better. We're not against development. We're just not. We're against this particular development, and we really need to look at it and design something much more suitable for Godalming and for the residents. And I think we need to go back to the drawing board on that particular issue. Thank you.
Councillor Hunter, I think you wanted to come back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been on the local plan for housing for the last 2 years, and through a wide consultation, there is a great need for one-bedroom houses. So to say that they're not needed is incorrect. We've consulted for over 2 years on this matter, and there's a great need for small one-bedroom houses. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask Councillor Stanley, Mrs. Stanley.
Thank you, Chairman. Getting back to the loss of industrial and commercial land, page 27, under the heading Planning Considerations and Principle of Development, it states quite clearly, third up from the bottom, the loss of suitably located industrial and commercial land is resisted in accordance with policy IC2. I believe at the moment there are 49 tenants on this site. How many have left or have found alternative accommodation, and how many will actually be staying on the site? Do we know that? I know there are some car repair places which will not be popular. They are the most difficult to relocate. But there are, if I remember rightly from the site visit, there were perhaps 4 of that kind of premise on the site, and the other 40 odd must be, hopefully, would be accommodated or could be accommodated. Does anybody know? The officers know?
I'll ask the officers to deal with that, and to answer Mary's question as well, if you would, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Chairman. We haven't got the information in respect of the individual businesses. I do really appreciate the concern in relation to them, but it's a difficult bit of advice to give members, but I do have to take you back to the point I made earlier, that the task in hand is to assess whether, in terms of its land use, it's appropriate to allow it to go to residential. And we have, in the first instance, been through that test already with the previous decision, and what came out of that is a request for it to have a mixed use coming forward. That's what they've done. But the remaining bit of control really is, have they got that balance right? It's not that I'm underestimating the difficulty around relocating existing businesses, but there are different sources of advice and mechanisms for sorting that, and certainly I know that the landowner's expectation is to support relocation as far as he can, but it wouldn't be appropriate for this committee to refuse permission on the basis you have inadequate information about exactly how those businesses are going to be relocated, important as it is. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Borozewski, you suggested deferral. Certainly is within the gift of the committee to resolve to defer the application. If you were to give a clear steer as to what, in the normal way, you are looking for on the applicant to resolve the objections, I suspect they may prefer a deferral to a refusal. But as ever, I would advise if you could give a very clear idea as to exactly what you're expecting to change over and above the changes they've already made from the previous decision. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Stannett, again, please come back.
Thank you, Chairman, for letting me come back. Really, what I want to know is, we've all taken the point over the housing need, and the mixture of the commercial and housing, I think, is quite right. But how mixed is mixed? How many people are likely to stay on in the commercial sense? If we manage to get the owner to reduce the amount of housing, would that increase the amount of commercial? Thank you.
Chairman, I think the message going back would be that the committee's expectation is to adjust the balance to reduce the amount of residential versus the amount of commercial space being retained. I don't think it's possible for you to fairly set a floor space limit, because it's very difficult for you to do that with proper evidence. But the challenge to the applicant is to rethink the position. There will be possibly viability issues in there. There will be about how the two sets of uses can coexist on the site. But that is the challenge for the applicant, to redefine the scheme and come back with a mixture of uses that will more appropriately satisfy your expectations. In that, it may be he can provide more information about how the existing tenants may be offered alternative accommodation. But to keep making the point, that isn't critical to the judgment. The judgment is about the balance between employment and housing. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Just a thought that the redevelopment of the site might well increase the rent of the units staying there anyway. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Chairman. I share my colleagues' concerns about parking. I think there's a serious traffic issue around here. The commercial space, it was commented on before. I think it's still here. The commercial space has been brought down to a minuscule level. And I think that from my point of view, I would like to see a better attempt at trying to provide some commercial employment. But I do recognise it's an unusual site. It's an unusual site for geography, for everything about there, and I share my colleagues' concerns about how perhaps we've got squares of paper being put on a plan to move them around, and what we need to do is to throw that away and rethink it. It requires an unusual and imaginative solution. And it may be that we've got to forgo some one-bedroom flats with only one car parking space for two-bedroom flats, for two-bedroom spaces, for basically getting the right balance. But I would certainly support Councillor Fareschi's consideration of a deferral, because I think it would be unfair to throw this out. We want this to succeed, and we want to work with the developer. I think if he comes back next time, I think one of the things we're looking for is all the reasons why we can't have what we think we want. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you indeed. Councillor Mr. Stannard.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a point, common sense, I suppose, really. We're not going to get a mix of what's in there at the moment and housing. I think that needs to be made perfectly clear. You're not going to get car mechanics banging around as they do in a residential area. So you'll get high-tech stuff, and you'll get high-tech training and stuff like that, but you won't get the same mix. But in saying that, the site does need redeveloping. There is a lot of mishmash buildings in there, and on my site visit, there's a lot of asbestos that needs to come out. So people are working in that, which isn't good. So I think we'll want to remember that, because they are working in there, and roofs ease and creak in the wind, so they shouldn't be doing that, really. But there you go. But I think we all must remember that you're not going to get that same mix of commercial. Thank you.
Councillor Edwards, you wanted to come back as well?
If I can come back quickly, Chairman, thank you very much. If we are asked for a deferral here, I just want some advice as to how long the deferral would be, because obviously the developer, the owner, will want to look at the plans again and come forward with a different scheme, hopefully. We have to remember that we've taken Greenbelt here, so we want a real quality development. And I don't think this is a quality development. I understand the difficulty with mixing commercial with residential, because, you know, people want to live in a nice place, you know, and they don't want to look over whatever, a factory or, you know, a transport hub or anything else. So we understand the problems there, but we do need some imagination. And we want to support housing here, but it's got to be the right housing. And so if we could advise us, I mean, I remember we deferred something a few years back to give the applicant an opportunity to come back with something better. And when it came back, it was very good. So we have done it before. So if we could defer it for the required amount of time to give the developer a chance to come forward with a much better scheme, I'm quite happy to defer this matter.
Thank you. I think we are moving that way, aren't we? Councillor Mulner.
Thank you for letting me coming back, Chairman. I just had a couple of questions. I think I followed Mr. Sims. The mix between the total amount of residential and commercial is a proper matter for this committee, which could be a reason for refusal. And if deferment is a way of getting quite a change in that mix, that sounds quite a useful and positive solution, which sends the right message to the applicant. The other question, I'm looking at page 43, it's not annotated as paragraph 11, but it's the last paragraph. What's the history of the 643 square metres, which was amended to 287 in our update? Was that a previous thought?
Yes, that was the figure in the previous application for office space.
Very interesting. Thank you.
And Councillor Foresky, do you wish to move towards deferral? Or have you another question?
Oh, no, thank you for letting me come back, Chairman. No, I was just going to say, to pick up on the points that's been raised earlier, that, you know, we want to work, we want to be a council that seems to be working with the developer and the residents to get the best possible outcome. And a refusal is far less favourable than a deferral and it's, you know, it's not as time consuming. And I think we're so close to getting it right, and it sends the right message out that, you know, this is what we want to do. We want to work with the developer, we want to work with the community. And there's enough evidence here tonight to suggest that, you know, a lot of good could come out of this if we all work together. So I would stand by my original, which is to defer this so we can come back and work harder to get the scheme that is so needed, and not run the risk of an appeal, and it's in the local plan. Thank you.
It is in the local plan. Elizabeth, would you like to offer advice on that?
Well, Chairman, just to say that if that's the decision of the committee, I think I'm sure it would be welcomed by the applicant over a deferral. And I think I've gathered. Sorry, Chairman.
Yeah. Over a refusal.
Oh, what did I say? Yeah. Over a refusal.
Yeah.
Yes. But I'm detecting from the debate that the areas that you're looking for an improvement on are an improved layout and design, a greater proportion of employment uses in relation to residential than at present, and a fully worked out parking plan to comply fully with your guidelines, which would go hand in hand with an improved layout. I don't know whether there are any other areas, Chairman.
Councillor Frost? Reduction in the number of dwellings, yes. I think everyone has said that 100 is, or up to 100 is the phrase in the report, but is far too much. Other numbers of 80 have been suggested. Councillor Hyman.
Thank you again, Chairman. I'm just wondering that if deferment isn't a little bit of sort of sitting on the fence, and whether it's absolutely necessary, because haven't we been told that reduction in number of dwellings, the layout and design, to some extent the amount of employment space and the parking plan I mean, this is only an indicative plan, isn't it? This is outline and we're looking at access. Is it not the case that, I mean, could we sort that out by granting consent? I mean, it is in the local plan. Would it be dangerous for us to grant consent to this and then trust that we can sort these out, or not? You think it would be dangerous to do so?
In my humble opinion, it would be, but I'd ask the officers to adjudicate.
If you wouldn't mind, thank you.
I go back to what I said earlier, Chairman, and I think probably these items are better negotiated and for an amended indicative layout to come back to you with indicative details. That would be my advice.
Therefore, we are looking at a deferral, as Councillor Foresky has suggested. Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Edwards? Thank you. So we have a move to defer this item for further consideration of the grounds that we have stated. Have we got a list there, Tim or Elizabeth?
Yes, Chairman, just to remind you from what I said earlier, improved layout and design, an improved parking layout to fully accord with your guidance, reduction in the number of dwellings, and a greater percentage of employment first floor space in relation to housing on the site. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Therefore, can I move that deferral motion at this time? Those in favour, please show.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That is unanimous.
Unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. Let me just have a quick look at the item B1. Yes, we have another planning application, B1, that we also, I would suggest we need to defer as well. Do you wish to tell us anything about this one, officers?
Chairman, I agree. I think it would be appropriate to defer consideration of the second item until you've formed a final conclusion on the first item. Thank you, Chairman.
Again, need a proposer and seconder for that. Councillor Munner, Councillor Frost. Can I have a show of hands, those in favour of deferral from item B1? Unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. That completes the business for the evening. Thank you all very much indeed. Have a good Christmas. See you in the new year.